All right, guys, so it's weird because Rachel beautifully came up here and stole my thunder with the whole stroke talk, so I'm going to try to dance around it and not get into a lot of the nitty-gritty stuff because you guys have already heard it once tonight. But really, I want to start talking about who my patient was, and it was Fred. And this patient's a little bit different than the other patients that you guys have seen today because Fred is someone who I've known for roughly 5 years now. During my senior year, one of my dear coaches, Angie, who's a PT, she's the actual reason why I decided to come to PT school by working with her at her clinic. She's a ortho manual therapist, and she's amazing. Her dad, I used to sneak them into the student section of Maryland football games my junior and senior year. He was an avid, active gentleman. When I met him, he was in his 50s, and he started to come off. He had some hypertension, some early CAD type issues that he was going with. But in his youthful days, I mean, he was captain of the football team in high school. He was captain of the baseball team. He actually went to play in the minor leagues for the New Jersey Jackals. And I mean, this guy had an unbelievable life. And the last 10 years he spent working under the New Jersey governor as an associate. So he was high into business, very talkative, very formal, someone I kind of looked up to, I wanted to be like. And here he is. I get to meet him, and on Christmas Day 2014, he is watching his daughter's, she just got married 4 months prior, and they're watching their wedding video for the first time. And as he goes to make a joke about how she chose the worst dress of all time, he turns his face and looks, and as he looks at his new son-in-law, his son-in-law notices the facial droop. And notice him try to take a step, and he starts losing his balance, and he can't speak. And all of a sudden, he starts to collapse. And as he collapses, his son-in-law catches him, and his daughter, ironically, set a Fitbit timer to go. And within 27 minutes of his onset of symptoms, they went 2 miles, had him transported in their car, 2 miles down the road to their local hospital, had a CT done, and TPA pushed. Like 27 minutes. I'm going to tell you guys from personal experience, I've been to the hospital a couple of times for a couple of surgeries, if you haven't heard, and it takes them more than 27 minutes to give me a sheet of paperwork. So this guy, that was kind of awesome that they did that. So he had to take a semi-permanent leave from his job, and obviously they're in the hospital, they're trying to figure out what's going on, and so obviously Angie starts looking at her phone, trying to figure out the basics. She's an orthotherapist, so she's learned the whole stroke 9 yards, but something that she hasn't looked at in a long time. And so one thing that she found was like stroke is now the quote-unquote 5th leading cause because of how rapidly we're able to get people in the door, push TPA when we need to after getting a CT scan. We've improved that so much that it went from being, as of March 24th, 2015, the CDC has said it's now the 5th leading cause, which is great. But she knows what's happening. She knows that he had a blockage that happened. It was a right CVA. It was an MCA issue, so that means the right side of his middle cerebral artery was clotted, pushed TPA, his symptoms started to go down, they thought everything was in the clear. But as she's sitting there in the room, she starts texting me and telling me, because she knew how close I was to them, I DJ'd their wedding. So I was in the video, and in case any of you guys are getting married soon, let me know. It's my part-time gig. She's sitting there, and she starts looking up the web searches, and this is what she sees when she looks it up. This is what someone sees when they go up. And the worst part about it is that the biggest thing that's highlighted here is that most recovery from stroke takes place in the first 3 months and only minor additional measurable improvements occurs after 6 months following onset. How horrible is that to have, not only being a PT, but having that being struck in your mind? Such a horrible thing to put out there. And so to take a second to go back, if there's anything you guys take out of my presentation, I know I'm doing a little bit differently than everyone else. I want you guys to think about the importance of the caregiver and the importance of us having a little bit of ingenuity in what we do. Because I think that's something that we forget sometimes that we're taught in school. PTs, we're smart people. You give us a TheraBand, we're able to do anything. Like, you know, engineers got duct tape, we got TheraBands. We'll figure something out. And that's who we are. That's what we do. That's what makes our profession so unique, is that we're able to figure out what the problem is. And she forgot that. And she's sitting there in tears. They're in New Jersey, and she gives me a phone call. Actually, it was her husband who gave me a phone call. And they both work with me. They're both coaches with me, so we're very, very close. They're a very tight-knit family. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm like, you got to stop looking at that stuff. You got to let it go. Forget about all these things. Ironically enough, if he only had 1 or 2 of these things when she first saw him, I think she would have been okay. She would have been able to deal with it. He had them all. Every single one of these symptoms on this page, he had them all. And if you don't know what some of them are, come and find me afterward. I don't want to have a whole lecture on that. So I started thinking about what I could do, how I could cheer up. So I actually drove to Jersey. And on my way up, I was like, this is not going to work. I drove back home. I can't see her. He got transported out 11 days after being in the ICU. Got transported out to a local hospital that was right here. So I went to go visit him there. I went to go see him. And we're sitting out in the hallway. And I was like, all right, you're going to laugh at me for saying this, but I need you to listen to this lecture. She's like, I don't need a lecture. He's like, no, you just have to sit and listen to this lecture. And so I was lucky enough to have gone to the next conference in 2014 and have been a volunteer there. And there was, Andrea Bierman did a really, really good lecture. And if you look at what she's talking about with her kids, I mean, I don't want to get into it, but she had a kid. The first kid she talks about was Kyle. And Kyle was a 3.5-year-old kid who had an accidental gunshot wound to his spine. And the theory at the time, if you have a kid who has a gunshot wound, I mean, what do? We compensate. That's what's taught to the general public, to compensate for it. His spinal cord at that point lower, he's done, can't move. But she didn't believe that. And she talked to the caregivers and she got them on a program, and after 31 visits of an hour-long session, this kid 17th month later was able to walk into the grocery store with his dad. Mind you, he was using a rear rolling walker, but he was able to walk independently. After 75 visits, he was able to attend kindergarten independently. So it kind of shows you that we have these things out there, but there's a way to break it. And so she took that wholeheartedly. She took it a little too strong, if you ask me, because this is the exercise program that she created for her father. And if you guys can't see it, it is literally broken down hour by hour. What constant therapy around 11:45. After lunch, he's got, I don't know, 20 sit-to stands, 3-minute standing marches, 40 cane lifts, 50 scapper tracks. I mean, she literally broke it down hour by hour, and this was she changed her schedule. When she was at home, she did that. She called me in on Wednesdays because she knew I had Wednesdays off and I could help out. And then on Mondays, opposite of me, another one of our good friends, Alex, who majored in kinesiology from the University of Maryland, is now in grad school, or looking at grad school, I should say, was running this. And he was a former tech for her, so he knew it all. And so literally from 10:45 to 3:45, this gentleman does not have a break. He literally has a 12-hour-a-day PT session going, which is kind of crazy, but at the same time is kind of awesome, because that's showing you what a PT could do, how you can empower a caregiver. But that kind of maybe goes to my next point. I think we need a paradigm shift. We need to think about things a little differently. We need to think about the importance of it, because he ended up having great return. His lower extremity was great. 13th months later, we run into a different problem. He's a right MCA. Upper extremity is affected more than lower extremity by textbook definition, and for him, it was. So what do? Well, start looking at stuff. This ICF model, beautiful caregiver, et cetera, et cetera. Let's skip that. We start realizing the biggest issue that he has is this weird thing called synergy patterns. And I swear I looked at textbooks. We tried to figure out exactly what it is. The O'Sullivan book literally states that this movement is essentially what the book explains, that it's a gross motor pattern that occurs. And there are multiple theories on it. Well, in 2006, this group actually went through to measure exactly what's happening. Why do we find these people going into this flexion, abduction, external rotation, scapula change? Why do they do that? What's going on in the brain? And so we actually found is that if I asked you guys to pick this cup up off the table, have my hand right here, we'd all probably just say, okay, your flexors compartment needs to fire so you can grab the cup. Wrong. That's what I thought for the longest time. But actually what it is that as it's firing, according to this study, your extensor compartment's firing too. It's helping control that motion. So as you're going to reach out, your flexor is the main fire, but the muscles on the opposite side are actually working to control that grade of motion. What he couldn't do is control that grade of motion. So we're sitting there like, all right, so it's not like his arm isn't broken, it's his brain's not getting the message out right. Well, how can we fix that? Well, right now, he's right here. He's at a 2. I want him to be at like a 6. I want him to be fully functioning again, based off this scale. And this is just an imagery scale so you guys can see where he's at. So he looks at me and he's like, Sammy, I need you to be, let's get a robot in. And I look at him and I'm like, dude, I don't have 40 grand. I can't buy you a robot arm. That doesn't work. He's like, well, build me one. And I'm working with him and I'm like, I'm not Tony Stark. I can't do it, guys. I'm not that smart. He's like, no, you are smart. Figure it out. So me and Angie are sitting there and we're looking at some robotic studies, and we realize that robotic studies are great, but they're only really great because they apply a lot of repetitive motion. All the studies kept on proving the same message. All the meta-analysis was showing us the same thing. It was really, really good at doing this repetitive motion, getting him to get practice. But do me a favor, catch this bottle for me. Don't drop it. Throw back. Nice throw. Catch it again. Did you catch it the same time? Same way each time? No. They were different, right? Hold it. I don't want to catch it again. I might drop it on myself. It's a really expensive suit. Every time we do a functional task, it's slightly different. Though it's the same task of catching, the environment, everything that goes around it is slightly different. And so that's what made it really challenging. A robot would literally have him doing the same program over and over again. But when we do things every day, we don't do that. So how can we then change it up? And he looked at me, and I was like, well, if I was Tony Stark, what would I do? I don't know. I'd get some duct tape and build an Iron Man suit. And he looked at, and I was looking at Angie, and she looks back at me. I'm like, what if we did just use duct tape? What if we made it that simple? We're PTs. Let's be a little, use some ingenuity. Let's bring it back a little. Let's figure something out. And so we start looking at different models, and we have the million-dollar question. Can we actually create a hand-over-hand technique that doesn't really use much to get this patient back in action? That was our whole point. And so the big thing is that Shumway Cook did a model where she talks about the individual, the task, and the environment. This is the traditional model that's out. It's what we use of all time. And so we were thinking, all right, well, let's change it up. What if we fix the environment? What if I took my hand, placed it over his hand, and attached, using just nurse's tape, my DIP joints to his? If I did that, I could help control his extension. If I can control his extension, maybe I can get him to queue up and fire his flexors and be able to do specific tasks. So by fixing the environment, by focusing on what is limiting him from the environmental standpoint, maybe we can then get him to actually do the task, build some confidence in the individual, and eventually get these gears going. So we're like, all right, well, let's try it. What's the worst thing that happen? It's not going to harm him, right? We're PTs, as long as we're not harming the person. If the evidence backs it up, because at this point, robots work except for that, yeah, let's do it. This is what we got. Oh, I love that voice, but I really don't need it. Sexy Batman's voice. All right, so what do we have? First day of trying it. Tape my hand to his hand, and all of a sudden, he's able to pick up wine corks, something he hadn't been able to do previously. All I have done is I'm fighting him into extension. I'm just giving him a little bit of extension resistance at a graded level, and he's able to pick up wine corks off a table. Not really, it is functional to some extent, but how often I don't drink that much wine. I don't know about you guys, but I don't think that's going to be his main thing that he has to do. So we then moved on. We're like, okay, well, let's make it a little bit more difficult. What if we had different weights, different size objects? So we took a bunch of Tupperware and we actually filled them up with different size marbles. And you could see it. He's initiating everything. He's initiating the extension. He actually initiates the extension. I'm following him. Our recorder had a cough that day, so sorry about that, guys. And then let's even make it more functional. I can give that to his daughter and have and essentially what we did is for our actual case report, I had him do that for 4 weeks straight, 30 minutes every day, not skipping a single day with his daughter or with the son-in-law who was he had a master in exercise physiology, he's a great trainer. Well, with me, let's make it more functional. Let's do things that are a little bit more difficult. Let's add some walking into it. So why don't we get a cup from the cupboard? Why don't we go to the refrigerator? Why don't we fill up a glass of water? And you can see him, as he's focusing with that upper extremity, it becomes more and more difficult for him to focus on the task of his gait. His gait changes. But he gets it. He walks all the way through. He's holding the grip. I'm not helping at all with this grip at this point. And once we get to the table, you actually find out that my finger, you guys can see it, the tape on my finger actually falls off. So I actually have no control of his thumb during this end task. So how can we track this? Here's the problem that I had with this entire thing, is that in the world of PT, we've decided that OT is going to handle a lot of the hand stuff. So one, there's not a lot of outcome measures that I can use because he scored so low initially. There wasn't much I can actually use to do that. I did find the MAM-20, which is the manual ability measure. It's a 20-point questionnaire that is used mostly by OTs. That was a great way for me to get a base score for him. Then dynamometer strength, grip strength. We were able to get it. It was really low on the first one, but we got something. And then the Fuglemeyer, which is an upper extremity assessment that looks at spasticity, looks at range of motion, looks at reflexes. We're able to go through all those. And really, he had gains across the board. Excuse me, guys. He had gains across the board. From his initial onset date to his last across the board, he went from about a 15% raw score to a 65% raw score on the MAM-20, sorry. He went from a 12% to a 42% on the Fuglemeyer, and his grip strength went from 4 pounds to 10 pounds, which isn't a lot. And even with the Fuglemeyer, it's still a relatively low score. That just means he was a 40% on that score essentially means that he went from not scoring anything on some of the parts of the exam to actually being able to do some of the parts, which is great, but it's something. And so at the end, if we go back to the same image, he went from a 2, he's now back down to a 4, which is great. A lot of recovery. So what's the takeaway message? We have to empower our caregivers. We have to empower that ingenuity, that raw ingenuity that is a part of our field that we sometimes forget about. That's what we need to focus on. That's what we need to bring it back to. Because I don't think I did anything special. We thought of an idea because the guy said, use some duct tape like Tony Stark would. That's all it was. But it created something that we haven't seen before and something that we haven't found in the literature. And it worked. And the fact that his caregivers were that dedicated and the fact that he was motivated to do it made the biggest difference in the world. That's pretty much all I got, guys. Any questions? Yes, Kelly. Here's a tough question. So I initially tried to look at strength-induced protocols. To be completely honest, the task itself is extremely taxing on the person who's assisting because you are literally at an awkward position trying to angle your body. And I'm actually, when I do it, which is slightly different than his daughter, though she got the hang of what I was trying to do, I actually gave a little bit of scapula or support under the elbow to make sure that he didn't have too much or too little motion while reaching. And so it became a little challenging to do for long periods of time. And the tape, because of the sweat that perfusing from him actually using his hand, the tape comes off. And so about 30 minutes in to 40 minutes in, you're on your 4th or 5th time taping your hand back on. So looking at it, it was kind of arbitrary to be completely honest, but what we wanted to do was have something that was functionally happening every day to keep it consistent. And so 30 minutes seemed to be a time that worked for them. And when I came in 2 to 3 times a week, I kept it at 45-minute sessions to keep it consistent for the sake of literature. Anybody else? Yeah, Frankie. 4 weeks. 4 weeks. It would have been more, but I had to go to Costa Rica, and I wasn't going to miss out on that. And I had to go to Costa Rica. Oh, you wanted me there. Let's not be real. Yes. Oh, yes, yes. If I did not mention that, I'm so sorry. Now, yeah. Well, the MAM-20, some of the questions that I asked is, how do you feel? Can you button up your shirt by yourself? And it's a 0 to 4 Likert scale, with 2 being very difficult, 3 being kind of difficult, 1 being can't do it at all, 4 is I got it easy. And he himself will tell me regularly, like, oh yeah, I could do this now. Like, you used to have to cut up my sandwich for me. I can do it myself. I can eat my sandwich on my own. I can use 2 hands. I can wash my hands without someone worrying about it. So some of the simple things that we forget about, he's able to do on his own. Do you have a question? So it's a great question. He went through little bits of stages. Right now, if you ask him to fire, he can fire out of synergy. It doesn't happen 100% all the time, but a majority of the time it does. One of the things that I didn't mention because I didn't want to get too much into it is that some of the stuff I would also do is I did a little bit of PNF work with my hand on his hand to go through those motions. So now he's able to touch the back of his head. He could touch his opposite leg. he's able to do some of these motions that he completely couldn't do at first. But initially, right before we started this, he was pretty much flaccid. And he kind of went through some of those patterns that you say, or the stages that we learn about through this program. Anybody else? Awesome. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much.